The brand new Oakdale Police Department patrol car pulled into my own gas station at 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in mid-January, with 3 inches of fresh lake-effect snow on the hood and Officer Daniel Polanski behind the wheel, 26 years old, 6 months out of the academy, and 4 days back from his field training officer sign-off. Behind him in the passenger seat sat Margaret Kilroy, 50 years old, blonde, in a turquoise parka and a pair of designer sorrel boots, holding a Stanley insulated mug and looking at me through the windshield like I was the man who had personally canceled her Christmas. Officer Polanski got out. Margaret got out. They walked up to the pumps. Officer Polanski said,
"Sir, Mrs. Kilroy here has filed a complaint that you refused service and threatened her at this station. I'm going to need to ask you a few questions."
I said,
"Officer, of course, before we start, would you do me one favor and key your shoulder radio?" "Dispatch, this is Chief Hollis."
The dispatcher's voice came back inside of 2 seconds. The same voice I had been hearing every Tuesday morning briefing for 6 years. She said, "Go ahead, Chief. I am Wyatt Hollis, 56 years old, born in Oakdale, Michigan, Upper Peninsula, on a Tuesday in February of 1969, in the room my mother had been a teenager in a clapboard house my grandfather Esco Hollis had built with his hands in 1948 out of milled hemlock he had paid for in fresh venison and a borrowed Plymouth flatbed. Oakdale is a town of 3,800 people, 16 miles north of Marquette on US 41, at the corner of a hard cedar swamp and the south shore of a small bay of Lake Superior that we have been calling Hollis Cove since approximately 1953, even though the U.S. Geological Survey, on its 1962 map, called it Pickerel Bay. I have been chief of the Oakdale Police Department since 2018. I was a detective from 2011 to 2018. I was a patrol sergeant from 2003 to 2011. I was a patrol officer from 1996 to 2003. Before that, I was a Marine Corps military police corporal in 29 Palms, California, from 1989 to 1993. Before that, I was a 15-year-old kid in Oakdale who had not yet figured out what he wanted to do with his life and was working evenings and weekends at his father's gas station on US 41, which is called Hollis Gas and Grocery, and which my grandfather Esco opened on a Saturday in May of 1962 with a single pump, 11 cans of motor oil, and a refrigerator case full of his wife's pasties. I inherited the station from my father, Theodore Hollis, on April 3, 2014, after Dad died of a heart attack on the back step of the bait cooler while restocking night crawlers at 6:14 a.m. on a Saturday in May. My sister Cora, 54, manages the day-to-day operation. She lives in the upstairs apartment above the store with her husband Bryce and their 3 Australian shepherds. She has been running the cash register since 1985. She knows every regular customer's name, every regular customer's order, and every regular customer's children's birthdays. She is, in the language of Upper Peninsula commerce, the most powerful private citizen of Oakdale, Michigan, and she has been since approximately 1996. I am divorced. My ex-wife Linnea moved to Phoenix in 2009 because she could not, in her own words on the front porch of our house that February morning, do one more winter in this God-forsaken icebox while you work 100 hours a week. We did not have children. Linnea and I had agreed in 2002 that the right time would come, and we had not, in the 7 years that followed, found the right time. The right time turned out to be the absence of children. She is now remarried to a podiatrist in Scottsdale. We exchange Christmas cards. She sends me photographs of her saguaros. I send her photographs of the bay. I raised my younger brother Bobby from 1993 to 2008. Bobby is now 31 years old, runs a snowplow and handyman business out of Marquette, has a wife named Jenny and 2 boys, and calls me at the station every Friday afternoon at 4 p.m. without fail, because that is what older brothers and younger brothers do in this part of the country. Bobby was 11 months old when our mother died of a brain aneurysm at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning in October of 1993. I was 24 and had just gotten home from the Marine Corps with an honorable discharge and a duffel of dress blues. Dad was 49, had been running the station alone since Mom's diagnosis the previous spring, and was the kind of UP man who would not have admitted he was drowning if he had been holding the rope. I told Dad on the day we buried Mom that I would stay. I told him I would help raise Bobby. I told him I would work the station with him until Bobby graduated from high school. I did all three. Bobby graduated from Marquette Senior High in May of 2008 and joined the Michigan National Guard the next month. I made patrol sergeant at the Oakdale PD a month after that. Dad lived another 6 years and 3 months. He never told me, in any of those years, that he was grateful. He did not need to. He left me the station in his will. He left Bobby $12,000 in a savings account he had been adding to since 1993. Birch Harbor Estates is a planned community at the end of a private gravel road called Cedar Bluff Lane, 3 miles north of my gas station, on the south shore of Lake Superior. The development was built in 2019 by an out-of-state developer named Camden Brothers Holdings out of Bloomfield Hills. 36 homes on 12 acres of formerly Forest Service land that Camden Brothers had bought from the state of Michigan in 2017, in a quiet sale that the township residents did not know was happening until the bulldozers arrived. The homes were marketed in Detroit and Chicago at prices ranging from $800,000 to $2.1 million. The buyers were almost all weekenders. Their license plates were almost all out of state. Margaret Kilroy and her husband Daniel Kilroy bought the 4-bedroom on the highest lot of Birch Harbor Estates in October of 2020 for $985,000 in cash. Daniel was a recently retired General Motors purchasing executive. Margaret had been a stay-at-home mother of 2 adult sons who had both moved to the West Coast and stopped returning her phone calls in approximately 2019. She was elected president of the Birch Harbor Estates Homeowners Association in March of 2022 on a platform of, in her own campaign flyer, elevating the standard of community amenity and creating a true private resort experience for our member families. I met Margaret Kilroy for the first time on a Saturday afternoon in May of 2022, about 6 weeks after her election, when she walked into the gas station in white linen pants and a turquoise quilted vest, looked at the cooler of pasties Cora had been making since 1985, looked at the deer processing schedule taped to the wall, looked at the bait cooler my father had died on the steps of, and said, with the smile of a woman who had been to charm school in the 1980s and had not learned a single thing there, "Hello, I'm Margaret Kilroy, the new president of Birch Harbor Estates. I'd like to discuss a community amenity arrangement with your station." Cora, behind the register, did not look up from her crossword puzzle. Cora did not look up because Cora had been waiting 28 years to meet a Margaret Kilroy, and she did not want to use up the moment all at once. I said, "Mrs. Kilroy, what kind of arrangement did you have in mind?" She said, "Well, Sheriff." I said, "I'm not the sheriff, ma'am. The sheriff is in Marquette." She said, "Oh, I'm sorry. Well, Mr. Hollis, I think what would benefit both of our communities is a discount on fuel for Birch Harbor Estates members, maybe a flat 10% off retail. We have 36 member households. Many of us drive trucks and SUVs. It would be a meaningful relationship for your station." I said, "Mrs. Kilroy, our retail margin on fuel is 6.5 cents per gallon. A 10% discount on retail would cost me approximately 22 cents per gallon out of pocket. I would lose money on every gallon Birch Harbor Estates members purchased. I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to do that." She tilted her head. She said, "Oh, but Mr. Hollis, our HOA also has a small private fuel facility on site for our member convenience. I was thinking the relationship could include you, perhaps, providing the wholesale fuel for that pump. We would, of course, source from your station rather than driving down to Marquette. It would be a real partnership." That was the sentence that should have told me, on a Saturday in May of 2022, exactly what Margaret Kilroy was running at Birch Harbor Estates. I did not know it on that Saturday. I should have. I had been a Michigan-trained police officer for 26 years. I had been a UP gas station owner for 8. I had heard exactly that kind of sentence twice before in my career, in 2014 and again in 2017, from 2 different people who had both ended up indicted in federal court inside of 3 years. I just said, on that Saturday, "Mrs. Kilroy, the retail price at the pump is the price. The bulk wholesale agreements I have are with my regional supplier in Green Bay. They are not transferable. I will not be selling fuel to your HOA at wholesale. Thank you for coming in. Cora, would you ring her up if she'd like a coffee?" Margaret did not buy a coffee. She left. She did not come back to the station for the next 18 months. What she did during those 18 months was a great deal of other work. She walked into the Oakdale Pasty Cafe in August of 2022 and asked the owner, my cousin Rita, for a Birch Harbor Estates community discount on a standing order of 40 pasties every Saturday morning for the HOA's weekend brunch club. Rita laughed in her face and rang her up at retail. Margaret did not come back to the Pasty Cafe for 13 months. She walked into the Oakdale Hardware Cooperative in September of 2022 and asked the owner, a Finnish-American man named Sulo Cantelli, for an HOA rate discount on a winter delivery of seasoned cordwood. Sulo, who is 71 and who had been delivering cordwood to UP residents at retail since 1979, said, in his careful Finnish-inflected English, "Mrs. Kilroy, the price of cordwood is the price of cordwood. The trees do not know your HOA." Margaret did not come back to the hardware co-op until she needed a snow shovel in January of 2023, at which point she paid retail. She walked into Jonas Saumala's deer processing barn in October of 2022 with 2 white-tailed does her husband had shot, and she asked for a community amenity discount on the processing fee. Jonas, who is 68 and who had been processing deer in Oakdale since 1981, said one sentence to her in Finnish, which I will not translate here, and went back to his work. Margaret did not come back to Jonas. She drove her deer to a processor in Nagani. In total, between May of 2022 and December of 2023, Margaret Kilroy attempted to extract a Birch Harbor Estates community amenity discount from 11 separate Oakdale businesses. She was refused at every one. She did not call the police on any of them. She did not file complaints against any of them. She did not yell at any of them. She simply went to the next business on her list and tried again. What she did was build, very quietly, on the southwest corner of the Birch Harbor Estates amenity park, an unpermitted 3,300-gallon underground storage tank with a single dispensing pump, a small gatehouse cover, and a private bookkeeping system administered by her own LLC. She bought retail fuel in town. She trucked it back to her tank in 50-gallon drums on the back of her husband's Ford F-350. She resold it at her HOA's private pump to her own members at a 30-cent per gallon markup. Across 18 months, the operation grossed approximately $86,000 in revenue and netted, after retail purchase costs, approximately $51,000 in pure margin. The margin went into Birch Harbor Hospitality Ventures LLC, of which Daniel Kilroy was the registered agent and Margaret was the sole member. Her demand at my station on the second Tuesday of January 2024 was not for personal use. It was for wholesale supply to her retail resale operation. Wholesale fuel would have raised her margin from 30 cents per gallon to 78 cents per gallon. The 18-month operation that had netted her $51,000 would, with my wholesale supply, have netted her something closer to $170,000. That was the operation I refused. I did not know about that work yet. I would learn about it in the 14 weeks following her January 2024 return. The 14 weeks would close on a Tuesday in mid-April at the Oakdale Township Hall, with the Michigan State Police, the EPA Region 5 Emergency Response Coordinator, the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, the Marquette County Prosecutor, and 117 residents of Oakdale Township in the seats. Margaret Kilroy would walk into that meeting, believing she was about to revoke my gas station's commercial license. She would walk out of that meeting in handcuffs, with the underground storage tank at her HOA's private amenity park being pumped out at the same minute by an EPA-certified contractor, who would charge her HOA, eventually, $147,000 for the work. Margaret Kilroy walked back into my gas station on the second Tuesday of January 2024 at 8:21 a.m. with her Stanley insulated mug and her turquoise parka, and a particular expression on her face that I recognized, from 26 years of police work, as the expression of a person who has decided the morning is going to be about them, whether anyone else likes it or not. She walked past 4 regular customers at the coffee station. She walked past Cora at the register. She came up to the counter, where I was unloading a case of WD-40 from the back room. She said, "Mr. Hollis, I'd like 10 gallons of premium and a full tank for the GMC at the second pump. I'd also like, this morning, to discuss the community amenity arrangement we never finalized in 2022. The HOA board has authorized me to make a renewed offer." I said, "Mrs. Kilroy, Pump 4 is open. Premium is $6.29 a gallon today. I don't have authority to discuss any arrangement that involves discounted fuel at the wholesale level for an HOA. I have told you that. I'll thank you to pump and come pay." She did not move. She said, in a voice that lifted a half octave, "Mr. Hollis, we are members of this community. We pay property taxes that fund the township road in front of your station. We deserve a partnership. I'm not leaving without an agreement." The 4 regular customers at the coffee station had gone quiet. Cora, at the register, had set down her crossword puzzle. I said, "Mrs. Kilroy, I am happy to sell you fuel at our posted price. I am not happy to be told what I owe a person who has not bought a coffee in this station in 20 months. The door is the same door it was on the way in. Please pump and pay, or please leave." She lifted her phone. She dialed 911. She put it on speaker. "This is Margaret Kilroy at the Hollis Gas and Grocery on US 41 in Oakdale. The owner here is refusing service to me, a paying customer, and he is being verbally aggressive in front of my person. I am in fear for my safety. I would like to file a complaint. I would also like to file a charge of consumer fraud against this station for posted price discrimination." The dispatcher, a woman named Patty Sanderson, who I had known since the 3rd grade in 1976, and who had been answering the Oakdale police dispatch lines since 1991, said, in the calmest voice she has ever used at her desk, "Ma'am, stay on the line. I'll get an officer out to you." The officer who responded, 6 minutes later, was Officer Daniel Polanski, 26 years old, 6 months out of the academy, 4 days back from his field training officer sign-off, brand new to the patrol rotation. Margaret had not seen him before. Margaret had no idea who the chief of the Oakdale Police Department was. Despite his name being on the police station signage, 1 block off Main Street, and on the township letterhead, and on the official township website, and on the photograph hanging in the lobby of the Oakdale Pasty Cafe 3 doors down. She had no idea because, in 20 months of trying to extract free services from Oakdale businesses, she had never once stopped to learn the name of any town official. I have already told you what happened in the first 60 seconds after Officer Polanski arrived. What happened in the next 3 minutes was that Officer Polanski, holding the radio at his shoulder and listening to Patty Sanderson identify me by voice across the band, looked at Margaret Kilroy in her turquoise parka and said, in the same calm professional voice I had taught him to use at the Academy refresher I had personally led at the Oakdale Township Hall in October, "Ma'am, the man you have just called the police on is my supervisor. He is the chief of the Oakdale Police Department. I am going to take your statement very carefully because false police reports in the state of Michigan are a misdemeanor under MCL 750.411. A, punishable by up to 93 days in county and $500 in fines. Please walk with me back to the cruiser." Margaret Kilroy did walk back to the cruiser. She did not get into the cruiser. She stood next to the front passenger door, with her Stanley insulated mug in her hand, and watched Officer Polanski take the statement. She said, when she got to the part about the alleged verbal aggression, "Well, perhaps I overstated. I felt threatened. I was upset. I have been under a lot of stress about my HOA's amenity issues." Officer Polanski wrote down the words, "Perhaps I overstated," in the incident report verbatim. Margaret Kilroy looked back at the gas station's front window. Cora was standing inside it. Cora had her arms crossed. Cora's face was a face Margaret Kilroy was seeing for the first time in 20 months. Not the polite face Cora had used at the register in May of 2022, but the face Cora used when she had been watching somebody steal from her family for a year and a half, and had finally been given permission, by the badge on her brother's belt, to stop pretending she had not been watching. Margaret Kilroy looked at Cora. Cora did not move. The 4 regular customers at the coffee station, Sulo Cantelli, Rita from the Pasty Cafe, a retired millwright named Olavi Heikkinen, and Jonas Salmela, the deer processor, all turned around at the same time, in the same direction, with the same expression on their faces. The 4 of them had not, in 18 months, said a word to each other about Margaret Kilroy's discount campaign. They did not have to. UP coffee stations communicate in glances, and the glances they had been exchanging since August of 2022 had all said the same thing. The thing they had been quietly waiting 18 months to see had just happened. Officer Polanski closed his notebook. He thanked Margaret for her statement. He walked her back to the cruiser. He drove her back to the Birch Harbor Estates gate. He did not write her a citation that morning. He did not need to. The citation would arrive in her mailbox by certified mail 31 days later, after Annika Ronquist's office had built the surrounding file. The incident report number was 2024-0114-017. The body cam footage was preserved per departmental policy. The dispatch recording was preserved per departmental policy. Officer Polanski filed the report at the Oakdale Police Department at 9:48 a.m. that morning. He copied me on it at 9:51 a.m. I called my old friend Lieutenant Hannelore Idakoski at the Michigan State Police Nagani post at 10:14 a.m. I had known Hannelore since 1991, when we were both academy cadets at the State Police Training Center outside Lansing. I told her the whole story. I told her about Margaret's 2022 wholesale fuel sentence. I told her about the unspecified, private fuel facility at Birch Harbor Estates. I asked her whether her post had any pending complaints involving Birch Harbor Estates. Hannelore said, "Wyatt, hang on, let me pull the master." She came back on the line in 3 minutes. She said, in the careful tone she used when she had bad news, but the kind of bad news her old friend would actually be glad to get. "Wyatt, we have 11 open complaints against Margaret Kilroy across 19 months. 3 are false police report incidents. 2 are consumer fraud allegations against Birch Harbor Estates members. 1 is an unlicensed fuel handling tip we received in November from a former Birch Harbor groundskeeper named Pella Leitinen. The Pella tip says, and I am reading directly, they have an underground tank by the gatehouse that I personally helped pour the pad for in May 2020, and that I have never seen an inspector come to look at in 3 years of working there." I said, "Hannelore, Pella Leitinen worked for my father at the gas station in the summer of 1988. He is going to be the most helpful witness in this case." She said, "Wyatt, you want me to bring this to EPA?" I said, "Hannelore, I want you to bring this to EPA, EGLE, the Marquette County Prosecutor, and the Oakdale Township Board. I want every regulator at the same table by Thursday morning. I am buying the coffee at the Pasty Cafe at 8 a.m. Patty Sanderson is going to be the one who calls the meeting." Hannelore laughed for the first time in our phone call. She said, "Wyatt, Sheriff Halford is going to want to be there too." I said, "Hannelore, Sheriff Halford is going to be there because Patty Sanderson is going to call him at 7:30. Patty Sanderson called Sheriff Halford at 7:31 a.m. on Wednesday. He was there at 8 a.m. Thursday. Pella Leitinen, 66 years old, retired Birch Harbor Estates groundskeeper, born in Eagle Harbor, walked into the Oakdale Pasty Cafe at 8:14 a.m. Thursday with a manila folder under his arm and a Stanley thermos of black coffee in his other hand. He sat down at the table with me, Hannelore, Sheriff Halford, the Marquette County Assistant Prosecutor, a 32-year-old named Annika Ronquist, who had been hired in 2022 and was, in Hannelore's words, the kind of prosecutor who reads the file twice before her first cup, and Charles Kotila of EGLE District 6 in Marquette. Pelle's manila folder contains 16 photographs he had taken with a flip phone between 2020 and 2023 of the underground fuel tank installation at the Birch Harbor Estates amenity park, specifically the gatehouse pump, the unlabeled tank monitor box, the missing observation well caps, the visible groundwater seepage at the base of the concrete pad in spring 2023, and a black tarp the HOA had thrown over the tank truck delivery hose every Saturday morning at sunrise, across 41 consecutive Saturdays. Charles Kotila of EGLE looked at the photographs for 11 minutes without speaking. Then he said, "Mr. Hollis, this is an unpermitted Class C underground storage tank in a documented Lake Superior shoreline zone in a federally designated wellhead protection area. The EPA is going to declare an imminent and substantial endangerment under RCRA Subtitle 1. We will have a regional response coordinator on site within 48 hours. The tank will be pumped, removed, and the soil tested at the HOA's expense. The HOA will be cited for unpermitted operation. The HOA president will personally be subject to civil penalties, up to $37,500 per day. Every day, the tank has been operating without a permit. By my count, the days run from May 22, 2020, to today." Annika Ronquist of the prosecutor's office wrote down the number of days on a yellow legal pad. The number was 1,322 days. She underlined the multiplication. She said, in the careful voice she used in court, "That is a potential civil penalty exposure of $49,500,000, before federal criminal charges. The Pasty Cafe was quiet. Sheriff Halford said, "Wyatt, I don't think Mrs. Kilroy knows." I said, "Sheriff, Mrs. Kilroy does not know. Mrs. Kilroy is, as we sit here, drafting a complaint to the Township Board requesting the revocation of the commercial license at my gas station. The complaint is on Birch Harbor Estates, HOA letterhead. I have a copy. Pele's wife works at the Marquette UPS store where Mrs. Kilroy mailed it. The complaint is scheduled for the next regular township meeting on Tuesday, April 16th at 7 p.m. at the Oakdale Township Hall." Sheriff Halford said, "Wyatt, that is convenient." I said, "Sheriff, convenient is not the word my father would have used." Hannelore said, "What is the word your father would have used?" I said, "Hannelore, my father would have called it Providence." The 2 weeks between the Pasty Cafe meeting and the April 16th Township Board meeting were the most productive 2 weeks of my career as the chief of the Oakdale Police Department. I did not work my regular schedule. I worked 16-hour days. Bobby drove up from Marquette every evening to help Cora cover the station. My sister did not complain once. Across those 2 weeks, the EPA Region 5 Emergency Response Team in Chicago dispatched a coordinator named Trinidad Vega to Marquette. Charles Catilla of EGLE dispatched a Class A inspector named Pitar Barisha to the Birch Harbor Estates property. Pitar visited the property under the cover of a routine wellhead protection survey on the morning of April 8th. He confirmed everything in Pele's photographs. He took core samples of the soil around the tank pad. He found hydrocarbon contamination above the state's action level at 6 of 7 sample points. He found groundwater contamination at the 7th. The contamination was, in Charles Catilla's professional opinion, moderate to significant for a recent leak from an unpermitted tank. Trinidad Vega declared an imminent and substantial endangerment on April 11th at 11:14 a.m. via Federal Register filing. The filing was, by EPA practice, not publicly released to the regional press until the morning of the enforcement action. The enforcement action was scheduled for Tuesday, April 16th, at 7:14 p.m., the exact minute the Oakdale Township Board meeting would gavel into session. Annika Ronquist, the assistant prosecutor, drafted the criminal complaint against Margaret Kilroy across the same 2 weeks. The complaint, when she filed it under seal at the Marquette County Courthouse on April 14th at 4:11 p.m., contained 11 counts. 3 counts of false police reports, 2 counts of consumer fraud, 4 counts of operating an unlicensed retail fuel station under Michigan Act 451 of 1994, 1 count of operating an unpermitted underground storage tank under Michigan Part 211 of NREPA, and 1 count of theft by deception of HOA reserve funds, totaling $214,000 across 38 months, embezzled through a sister LLC called Birch Harbor Hospitality Ventures. Registered Agent Daniel Kilroy. Annika filed a parallel referral to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Grand Rapids on April 15th for federal mail fraud, wire fraud, and Clean Water Act violations. The U.S. Attorney's Office accepted the referral the next morning. Joyce Larkin, the Birch Harbor Estates HOA secretary, drove into Oakdale on a Thursday evening at 7:14 p.m. on April 11th in her 2017 Subaru Outback, with a banker's box on the passenger seat and a casserole dish of tuna noodle bake on the back seat. She came to my front porch. She had not been to my house before. She had been waiting 9 months, by her own account, for a moment that allowed her to come. Joyce had been the HOA secretary since 2021. She had been quietly photocopying every document Margaret had asked her to file since approximately the 3rd week of her tenure. Her banker's box contained 2.5 years of HOA financial disclosures, 14 of Margaret's Birch Harbor Hospitality Ventures invoices to the HOA. The original 2020 construction permit application Margaret had filed with Marquette County for what she had described as a covered storage shed at the amenity park. The construction permit drawings were for the unpermitted underground tank. And a handwritten log Joyce had been keeping on yellow legal paper of every conversation she had overheard between Margaret and Daniel about the HOA finances at the gatehouse pump. The handwritten log was 31 pages long. The log started in October of 2022. The log ended on April 10th, 2024. I sat with Joyce in my kitchen for 2 hours. She drank 3 cups of coffee. She did not eat the tuna noodle bake because she had baked it for me and Cora. When she left at 9:31 p.m., I had a second cooperating witness, a complete documentary record from inside the HOA, and the kind of conscience witness whose testimony juries believe without prompting. I called Annika Ronquist at home at 9:34 p.m. Annika answered on the second ring. I told her about Joyce. Annika was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Wyatt, I've been doing this 7 years. I have never been handed a witness like that on a Thursday night. Tell her she has my office's full protection. We will not name her in any filing until the indictment unseals." We did not. Joyce's name appeared in the unsealed federal complaint on April 17th, the morning after the township board meeting. The Birch Harbor Estates HOA had already, at that point, recalled Margaret and elected Joyce interim president. Joyce did not need anonymity by then. She had her job. Hannelore Itakowski drafted the Michigan State Police investigation timeline. Sheriff Halford coordinated with the Oakdale Police Department on the township meeting protocol. Officer Polanski, who had been the first officer on the call at my station, requested to be assigned to the township meeting detail. I approved the request. He had earned it. Cora baked 4 trays of pasties for the Township Hall that Tuesday afternoon. The Oakdale Township Hall, on the evening of April 16, 2024, smelled like fresh pasty crust and the coffee Patty Sanderson had been making at the back table since 5:45 p.m. The hall has been the Oakdale Township Hall since 1934, when it was built by the WPA out of fieldstone hauled in from a quarry near Big Bay. The hall holds, on a Forest Service occupancy permit, 240 people. There were 117 residents in the seats at 7 p.m. when Township Supervisor Esme Tikkanen called the meeting to order. Margaret Kilroy was in the third row. She was in a navy blazer and pearls. She was holding a leather portfolio with her revocation complaint inside. She had her husband Daniel beside her. She had her HOA secretary, a woman named Joyce Larkin, in the row behind her with a recording device. She had been preparing for this meeting since March 14th. She had rehearsed her remarks twice on the drive over. She did not know the EPA truck was arriving at Birch Harbor Estates at the same minute the meeting was being called to order. The agenda had 7 items. Items 1 through 5 were routine: minutes, bills, a road project, a deer hunting permit clarification, and a fire department equipment allocation. Item 6 was Margaret Kilroy, request for revocation of Hollis Gas and Grocery Commercial License. Item 7 was emergency business, township response to regulatory actions at Birch Harbor Estates. Item 7 had been added to the agenda at 9:47 a.m. that morning by Township Supervisor Tikkanen, with the unanimous consent of the Township Board, based on a sealed briefing she had received from Lieutenant Itakowski and Charles Cotilla the previous Friday afternoon. Margaret Kilroy had not seen Item 7. The agenda printed for the public table at the back of the hall had Item 7. Margaret had not picked up a copy. She had walked in with her own. Items 1 through 5 took 31 minutes. At 7:31 p.m., Township Supervisor Tikkanen said, "Item 6, Mrs. Kilroy." Margaret stood up. She walked to the podium with her leather portfolio. She read her prepared remarks for 9 minutes. The remarks alleged that my gas station was operating in violation of the township residential overlay. The station was zoned commercial since 1962, but Margaret did not know this. That my station was a nuisance to a neighboring community amenity, referring to her own illegal gas pump, and that my station's long-standing presence in this corridor was incompatible with the community character of Birch Harbor Estates. She concluded by formally requesting that the Township Board revoke my commercial license effective immediately. Township Supervisor Tikkanen thanked Margaret for her remarks. She said, "I would now invite Chief Hollis to respond, as the station owner of record." I walked to the podium. I did not raise my voice. I have not had to in 26 years. I said, "Supervisor, trustees, members of the public, the Hollis family has owned this gas station since May of 1962. The station is and has always been on commercially zoned property under Township Code Section 4.2 since the zoning code was first adopted in 1961. The station has held continuous Michigan retail fuel licensure since 1962. The station has not been the subject of any commercial complaint, environmental complaint, or consumer complaint in any year of its 62 years of operation. The station does not require any defense against Mrs. Kilroy's request because Mrs. Kilroy's request has no factual or legal basis. I paused. I looked at the room. I looked at Margaret. I said, however, the Township Board has, by unanimous consent this morning, added item 7 to tonight's agenda. Supervisor Tikkanen, I would respectfully request that the board move directly to item 7. Township Supervisor Tikkanen said, Item 7. Township response to regulatory actions at Birch Harbor Estates. Margaret Kilroy looked at her HOA secretary. Her HOA secretary looked at her husband. Her husband Daniel looked at the printed agenda Margaret was holding. His face did 3 things in 3 seconds. Lieutenant Hannelore Itakowski of the Michigan State Police walked to the podium. She was in uniform. She said, in the careful voice she used at Academy presentations, at 7:14 p.m. this evening, agents of the United States Environmental Protection Agency Region 5 Emergency Response Team, with the support of the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, executed an imminent and substantial endangerment order at the property of Birch Harbor Estates Homeowners Association. An unpermitted underground storage tank was identified at the HOA amenity park. The tank is currently being pumped and excavated for removal. The HOA has been served with a Federal Clean Water Act notice of violation. The HOA's president, Margaret A. Kilroy, has been criminally charged by the Marquette County Prosecutor's Office on 11 counts, including 3 counts of false police reports, 4 counts of operating an unlicensed retail fuel station, 1 count of operating an unpermitted underground storage tank, and 1 count of theft by deception of HOA reserve funds, totaling $214,000. Hannelore looked at Margaret. She did not raise her voice. She said, Mrs. Kilroy, Sheriff Halford has the warrant. Sheriff Halford? Sheriff Halford, in uniform, stood up from the back of the hall. He said, Mrs. Kilroy, you are under arrest. Please come to the back of the room. Margaret did not move for 9 seconds. Daniel Kilroy did not move for 10. Joyce Larkin, the HOA secretary, set down her recording device very gently and looked at her hands. The 117 residents of Oakdale Township did not breathe. Margaret Kilroy walked to the back of the hall. She did not look at me. She did not look at her husband. She did not look at her HOA secretary. She did not look at anybody. Sheriff Halford Mirandized her at the back of the Oakdale Township Hall at 7:48 p.m. on a Tuesday in April of 2024, in front of 117 of her neighbors, 2 Michigan State Police lieutenants, 1 EPA Region 5 Emergency Response Coordinator, who had driven over from Birch Harbor Estates at 7:38 to be present, 1 EGLE District Inspector, 1 Assistant Marquette County Prosecutor, 1 Township Board, my sister Cora, my brother Bobby, my dispatcher Patty Sanderson, Officer Daniel Polanski, Pella Lettinen, the retired groundskeeper, and me. I did not speak. I did not need to. Sheriff Halford walked Margaret out of the Township Hall at 7:52 p.m. through the side door that opens onto Main Street. The Marquette County Sheriff's cruiser was parked at the curb with its yellow lights running. Daniel Kilroy did not follow his wife. He stayed in the 3rd row, in his navy blazer, with his hands flat on the leather portfolio she had set down. He did not look at anybody. The Michigan State Police FBI liaison would come and collect him quietly at 9:14 p.m. after most of the residents had gone home. The 117 residents in the seats did not cheer when Margaret was walked out. UP residents do not cheer at a moment like that. They went quiet for a long minute. Then Sulo Cantelli, the 71-year-old Finnish-American hardware co-op owner, stood up in the back row. He took off his cap. He held it in front of his chest. He said, in his careful Finnish-inflected English, Supervisor Tikkanen, I would like to make a motion. Township Supervisor Tikkanen said, Mr. Cantley. Sulo said, I move that the Township Board issue a public letter of thanks to Chief Hollis, to Officer Polanski, to Lieutenant Itakowski, to Mrs. Sanderson, the dispatcher, to Mr. Lettinen, the witness, and to Mrs. Larkin, the witness. I also move that the township letter be read out loud at the next general session and recorded in the minutes. Township trustee Alexi Mata, the lead Finnish-American trustee, seconded the motion within a second. The motion carried unanimously. The bar opened to the public for pasty service at 8:14 p.m. Cora had baked 4 trays. They were gone by 8:47. Margaret Kilroy pleaded out in August to 7 of the 11 state counts. She drew 36 months in Michigan State Correctional, with 18 months suspended on conditions including full restitution and a permanent ban from any officer position in any Michigan Homeowners Association for the remainder of her life. Daniel Kilroy pleaded out in federal court in October to 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of Clean Water Act felony violation. He drew 27 months in federal custody and was personally ordered to pay $147,000 to the EPA for the underground tank cleanup, in addition to the $214,000 in restitution to the HOA reserve fund. The EPA pumped, excavated, and decommissioned the underground tank between April 16th and June 14th. The soil remediation was certified complete on October 28th. The HOA paid the entire bill. The Birch Harbor Estates Homeowners Association recalled Margaret by emergency vote on April 23rd. Joyce Larkin was elected interim president. Joyce's first official act on April 24th was to drive to my gas station in her own Subaru Outback, walk into the store past the bait cooler my father had died on the steps of, and ask Cora and me if the Birch Harbor Estates community could co-host a Lake Superior cleanup day on Memorial Day weekend with the Oakdale Township. Cora said yes before I had finished my coffee. I said yes 10 seconds later. The Memorial Day cleanup day brought 141 volunteers to the Lake Superior shoreline behind Birch Harbor Estates and along the bay in front of my gas station. 11 dump trucks of trash and tires and old refrigerators were hauled out of the woods. Pella Leitonen brought his pickup. Bobby brought his snowplow trailer. Cora brought 4 trays of pasties. Officer Polanski brought his dog. Joyce Larkin brought her Subaru and a 30-foot extension cord for the leaf blowers. I converted the back lot of my gas station into a community fuel co-op in November. The co-op offers Oakdale residents at or below the township low-income threshold a 5-cent per gallon discount on home heating fuel between November 1st and March 31st of each year, funded by a portion of the station's regular fuel margin and matched by an annual contribution from the new Birch Harbor Estates HOA at Joyce's request. The co-op served 61 households in its first winter. The cost to the station was approximately $12,000. The cost to the new HOA was a matching $12,000. The benefit to Oakdale was, in the words of an elderly Finnish-American woman named Mrs. Heitinen, who came in on a Tuesday afternoon in January 2025, the difference between a warm house and a cold house this winter. Bobby got the township snowplow contract starting in November. Cora rebuilt the pasty display case to hold 8 trays instead of 4. I bought a small framed photograph of my grandfather, Esco Hollis, standing in front of the station on opening day in May of 1962, and hung it above the register where his daughter, my sister, has stood since 1985. I still work as the chief of the Oakdale Police Department. I work the occasional Friday night patrol shift. The cops I work with do not, mostly, mention the Margaret Kilroy case. They do not have to. The fuel co-op opened to its first 61 households on November 1st of 2024. The discount is administered through a simple paper card Cora prints on cardstock at the station every October. The cardstock card is the same color as the pasty box stamp she has been using since 1985. Each household gets a card. Each card has the household's name and a number from 001 to whatever the count is in that year. The household brings the card to the pump. Cora rings the discount manually on the register. The discount applies through March 31st. We do not check incomes after the first enrollment. We trust our neighbors. We have not, in the year since the co-op opened, had a single household try to game the discount. We have had 3 households call the station in December and ask to be removed from the co-op because they had received a raise and did not feel right keeping the card. We re-enrolled all 3 of them in October of the following year because raises in this part of the country are not, generally, raises that last. Officer Daniel Polanski has been promoted to sergeant. He was promoted in December 2024 with the unanimous approval of the Township Board, and on the strength of his handling of the January 14th incident. He attended my announcement at the Township Hall in his dress uniform. His mother, Helena, and his grandmother, Inquiry, sat in the second row. Inquiry had been my 3rd grade teacher in 1976. Bobby and Jenny had their 3rd son in March of 2025. They named him Theodore Esco Hollis, after my father and my grandfather. The boy is 7 months old as I write this. He has my mother's eyes. He has my father's hands. He has the slow, steady patience of an Upper Peninsula winter that does not need to lift its voice. Cora retired from the day-to-day at the gas station in May of 2025. Her husband Bryce had a small stroke in February that he recovered from completely, and they decided together that 56 was the right age for Cora to step back. Her oldest daughter Ainsley, 28, took over the cash register in June. The fourth generation of Hollis women is now at the front counter. Ainsley has a math degree from Northern Michigan and a tattoo of a raven on her left wrist. She is, in the language of Upper Peninsula commerce, the most powerful private citizen of Oakdale, Michigan, in waiting. She will be in full power, by my estimation, by approximately 2031. I still own the station. I still keep my grandfather's framed photograph above the register. I still bring a thermos of coffee in on Tuesday mornings for the regulars at the coffee station. Sulo Cantelli still comes in at 7:14 a.m. on Saturdays for 2 pasties and a Verner's. Rieta from the Pasty Cafe comes in on Sunday afternoons for gas and a chat. Jonas Salmela, the deer processor, stops by on the way to his barn most days during deer season, which up here lasts approximately 10 weeks of the year. The bay outside the station window still freezes solid for 4 months every winter, and breaks up around April 22nd most years. The flagpole at the gas station still flies my grandfather's 1962 American flag, on most days that the weather allows. The flag is the same 48-star flag he hoisted on opening day, May 19, 1962, 3 months before Alaska and Hawaii officially joined the Union. Esco Hollis had bought the flag in 1958 from a Sears catalog and had refused, on principle, to ever replace it. We take the flag down on rough wind days. We put it up again the next morning. It has been on the same pole for 63 years. If you have ever had an HOA Karen demand free service from a business you worked 20 years to build, comment below with your state and what she said she was entitled to. Read every one. Subscribe. Next week, a Florida widower, a 1972 Cadillac, and the HOA president who picked the wrong car. She picked the wrong Cadillac.
Margaret Kilroy did not understand, and what most petty tyrants never understand, is that the man behind the counter is the fleas pullover at the small town-up gas station was not a man she could outweight. He was a Marine Corps veteran, a 30-year Michigan-trained police officer, the current chief of his town's police department, and the third-generation owner of a station his grandfather had built in 1962 with his own hands. She thought entitlement was a strategy. He thought a manila folder of photographs from a retired graphshooter was a strategy. The manila folder wins. It always wins, because a manila folder does not get angry, and a manila folder does not need to lift his voice. If an HOA Karen ever demands a discount you cannot afford to give, the first thing you should do tonight is start a log, date, time, and what she asked for. Save every receipt, save every voicemail, save every email. The pattern reveals itself. The pattern always reveals itself. If the story hit home, drop your own HOA nightmare in the comments, your state, and what she was entitled to. Subscribe. Next week, a Florida widower, a 1972 Cadillac, and the HOA president who picked the wrong car. See you on the next one.